Hi everybody, it's Jake from Everything is Jake 57, and today we're going to start season number 2 of Everything is Jake in one of my favorite places, Virginia City, Nevada, with episode 1, and we are going to review in its entirety the Ghost Railroad, the queen of the short lines, the Virginia and Truckee Railroad. There are really 3 parts to the Virginia and Truckee, which is shortly named the V&T. There's the part from here in Virginia City down to Carson City, the piece from Carson City up to Reno, and the part from Carson City down to Minden in the Carson Valley. This was the first piece of the V&T to be built, and the history of this area in Virginia City goes all the way back to the late 1850s. The California Gold Rush was in full bloom, and some people came back over the Sierra along with some Mormon miners. And at this time, in the late 1850s, there was no Nevada. This was part of the Utah Territory. It wasn't until 1861 that the territory of Nevada was started. The first miners here in the late 1850s were really looking for just gold, especially because there had just been the California Gold Rush. They kept finding this blue rock, however, in their rockers and their long toms, and they kept throwing it away, not knowing what it was. Well, somebody finally did look into and investigate and found out that it was very valuable sulfides of silver. That created the Virginia City boom and what initially led to the massive influx of people here in Virginia City and the massive number of mines that were created. Some of the mines were big. We'll look and see if we can find some of those. Some of the mines were not so big. There were an overarching financial aspect to the first parts of Virginia City, and that was what was called the Bank of California. The Bank of California had 3 primary members who oversaw this area and started to gain control of some of the smaller mines who they foreclosed on when they couldn't make their payments for the loans that they put together. These 3 men were William Ralston, Darius Ogden Mills, and the agent for the Bank of California here in Virginia City by the name of William Sharon. So slowly but surely, these 3 men took over many of the mines, and soon it became apparent to them that they needed a cheaper way to get the silver ore out of Virginia City and down to the mills, primarily along the Carson River. So therefore, in the late 1860s, they started to put together what was called the Virginia and Truckee Railroad. The first part of the railroad started in 1869, was finished right at the beginning of 1870, including this depot that you see behind me, and worked its way down to the Carson River and then into the new young capital of Carson City. One of the most important things about the V&T in Virginia City was in 1864, Nevada finally became a state on Halloween, and it was encouraged by Abraham Lincoln for 2 main reasons. First, he wanted 2 more votes in the Senate that would help him pass the Emancipation Proclamation. And second, he needed money to finance the Civil War. So millions of dollars from these mines in Virginia City ended up helping finance the Civil War. And a third item with a lot of this silver was San Francisco was basically built in many ways by the silver that came out of Virginia City. Everybody, Jake Just wanted to show you the Comstock mine. One of the biggest and most famous mines was right behind me. You can see the flat area and the tailings. This was called the Consolidated Virginia Mine. It was a consolidation of the Consolidated Virginia Mine and the California Mine. It was probably the richest of all the mines in Virginia City. Four guys who were called the Bonanza Kings basically had control of it. Their names were Fair, Mackey, O'Brien, and Flood. And they bought this land, and in 1873, they hit what was called the Big Bonanza at over 1,000 feet deep. And they were taking out every month between 1873 and 1876 over $3 million in silver every month. The bonanza lasted until about 1879. They, of course, had departed by that time and went to San Francisco, where most of the kingpins of this area and the silver barons went. And let's continue on and see what else we can find around Virginia City. Initially, upon the start of the VNT, there were 5 locomotives similar to the one behind me, which was actually number 11. The first 5 were the Lion, the Ormsby, the Story, the Virginia, and the Carson, named after Virginia City and the first 3 counties of Nevada, that being Lion, Ormsby, and Story. This number 11 was called Reno because it actually started running on the second part of the VNT that we will discuss, the Carson City to Reno section. So therefore you can get all the way from Reno to here to Virginia City. So let's go and find some of the mines around here and any other railroad paraphernalia we could find. Hey everybody, it's Jake again. We've now come south of Virginia City a little bit, and we've come over to what was called the Combination Shaft. It was rumored to be one of the deepest, over 3,000 feet deep, in search of silver. It was a combination of the Hale and Norcross, the Savage, and the Chalor Potosi mines. They all went down, and sometimes they crossed each other. But all of this ended up on the VNT Railroad to be shipped out of here. And that's what came up to 40 to 50 trains a day to bring all this ore down to the Carson River mills and bring lumber up from Lake Tahoe and other areas to build the shafts and support the mine underneath ground. So it's a beautiful still relic here of Virginia City. So we're going to head down south now. We're going to head all the way down to the Carson River Valley and see what we can find in terms of the old mills, and then head over to see what we can find in Carson City. Hey people, we're now a couple miles south of Virginia City. We've reached Gold Hill, which was a famous gold mining town in itself. There was a lot of gold here though. There was silver, but primarily these were some of the earliest mines were here in Gold Hill. As you can see behind me, there was a VNT, Virginia and Truckee depot here. It was for passenger service and served many of the mines that you see around the hillsides here. Another interesting feature on the Gold Hill Depot is why was it placed on the actual curve of the VNT? Well, the reason was because there's not very many flat areas in Gold Hill. It's all mountainous or canyons, so they had to put the depot in the only flat place they could find, which is right here on the curve of the VNT. Hi everybody, Jake. We are standing now on the new Virginia and Truckee rails. This used to be, however, starting in 1869, what was the Crown Point Trestle. Very famous trestle. What has happened is after the 1930s came along, additional mining from the Crown Point mine continued, and they had to fill in and dismantle the trestle and fill it in to make this flat area. The ravine is to my right, to your left, and the trestle was over 600 feet long and was painted red so people could see it. Very famous. It was demolished in 1936. Tracks were laid in 1936, but unfortunately the demise of the VNT portion between Virginia City and Carson City, the tracks were again torn out in 1938. So we'll continue on down. We have some good photos as well, but this is the location of where the Crown Point Trestle was in Gold Hill, Nevada. Hi everybody, Jake. We've now come down the hill from Gold Hill, and we've reached an important point here. As you can see to my right, you can see the original Virginia and Truckee Railroad right-of-way that headed to the next station down that was called Mound House. And we'll go down and check out if there's anything there in Mound House. When the VNT was renovated in the 1990s and 2000s, they could not go through, obviously, the development that has occurred. So they went to the west. As you can see, the tracks head down and then head to the right around Mound House to get to the east side of Carson City. So this is an important junction at the original VNT going into Mound House and the new VNT going around Mound House. Hi everybody, it's Jake again. Everything is Jake 57. We've now come down the hill from Virginia City and Gold Hill, and we've reached a very important point on the Virginia and Truckee Railroad. And behind me, you can see a split now shown by the streets. This was the station called Mound House. And Mound House was very important because it actually served two different railroads. 1869, the Virginia and Truckee came through here, down from Virginia City and Gold Hill. If you look off to the right, however, you will see another right-of-way that was in 1880. Three of the owners of the Virginia and Truckee, named William Sharon, Darius Ogden Mills, and William Ralston, decided they were going to build another railroad. And it was going to be called the Carson and Colorado, which would run from the namesake, the Carson River, 500 miles to the south,
to the Colorado River, where there was a whole bunch of mining going on. As I said, they started it in 1880, and the other big difference was, unlike the Virginia and Truckee, which was a standard gauge railroad, the Carson and Colorado was a narrow gauge railroad. That means the distance between the rails of a narrow gauge was only 3 feet versus 4 feet, 8.5 inches for the standard gauge Virginia and Truckee. We'll have more on the Carson and Colorado in a future episode of Everything is Jake 57. But Mound House lasted pretty much until the early 1900s, when the Carson and Colorado portion was sold off to the Southern Pacific.
Say it again.
The Virginia and Truckee part was abandoned in 1938, and the rails were ripped out in 1941. The station quickly became dismantled and abandoned, and today this is the location of all that you see of what remains of the Carson and Colorado junction with the Virginia and Truckee Railroad. So we're going to head down now to the Carson River, and then we'll head on to Carson City itself.
Hi everybody, Jake. Well, as you can see, we have reached the Carson River, and it is full at this time of year with all the snow melt from last winter. But what we have found is the first mill was the Brunswick Mill, and we see a bridge here that crosses the Carson River and starts to head up Brunswick Canyon. And if you look at the bridge itself, you can see actually that this was made from 2 turntables on the V&T Railroad. One was at Mound House that we were just at, and the other one was at a place called Steamboat Springs, which we'll look at later, south of Reno. So this bridge was brought over here when the other 2 routes were dismantled and kept as a bridge here over the Carson River. So we're going to head up. We are actually on the V&T right-of-way in the river canyon. We're going to see if we can find any other mills a little farther up. Hey everybody, it's Jake. We are now at the site of what was called the Merrimack Mill. These mills were built in the 1860s, and as we talk about in Ghost Railroads, there's always 2 features. First is the prize, and we saw the prize earlier in this episode. All those mines up around Virginia City, and these were part of the processing of all that mills that came and metals that came down here. They had to be crushed before they could be sent out to be taken away. So this was called the Merrimack. There were several more. There's the Yarrington Smelter, there's the Vivian, the Santiago, the Morgan Hill. So it was amazing how many mills were along here to process the ore. So let's continue on and see what else we can find, and then head into Carson City. Hi everybody, it's Jake. Everything is Jake 57, and we are now in the heart of Carson City, Nevada, state capital for Nevada. And as you see here in front of me, this is the site of the V&T shops and foundry. We'll have some old pictures to show you from 1949, and this is what it looks like today. So we're also going to go over and see if we can find the depot for the V&T, and then we'll move on up to Reno, as that was the second leg of the Virginia and Truckee. Railroad. Hi everybody, Jake. Well, we finally reached Carson City, and behind me you see the Carson City Depot for the Virginia and Truckee Railroad, built in 1872. It also became the connection for Reno to Carson City, and ultimately from Carson City to Minden in the Carson Valley. So, this will conclude today's portion, the first leg of the Virginia and Truckee. We will next move on up to Reno. And we're now in Reno, Nevada. And behind me, you see the last depot of the Virginia and Truckee Railroad. This depot was actually built by the Southern Pacific in 1926 after 4 different depots had burned before then. This is a Mediterranean style depot, beautiful building, still in use by Amtrak. So today we're going to now start back toward Carson City from Reno. And the reason this was so important, this junction point, was behind this building is the former Transcontinental Central Pacific Railroad, which today is now Union Pacific. But as we talked about up in Virginia City, there are 2 main things that you see in these ghost railroads. The prize, which were all the mines of Virginia City that we saw, and now the second one was right here, the connection to civilization. Because everybody back around the time of the boom in Virginia City wanted to go primarily to one space, and that was San Francisco. So you made the connection from Virginia City to here on the Virginia and Truckee, and then you could get on the Central Pacific and Pullman cars over to San Francisco. So let's head out and see what we can find of the Virginia and Truckee Railroad heading south to Carson City from Reno. Hi everybody, Jake. We have found a really awesome relic from the Virginia and Truckee Railroad. As you see behind me, to my left, your right, this is the abutment for the rail bridge that crossed the Truckee River, which you can see down below. This is really cool. This is only about a mile from the depot. The depot headed east and then made a direct turn to the south to get across the river. And these bridge abutments were built in about 1872. I should note that this section between Reno and Carson City was built in 1872 because what happened was the Virginia City to Carson City was primarily a freight railroad, and as we discussed, people then wanted to get to civilization. So quickly after the first phase was done from Virginia City to Carson City, they started here in Reno and built the 30 miles south to Carson, which we're going to look at today. So once Hey everybody, Jake. We're now in what's called Pleasant Valley, and the Virginia and Truckee came up on the hillside here to get out of the valley to cross these foothills that you see behind me. And I'm now standing on the rail grade of the Virginia and Truckee that went on the hillside. You can see the grade behind me and headed toward Carson City. This is the Steamboat Creek Valley, and we're going to kind of see what we can find of the old rail bed in the valley, see if there's any structures. But this is the north end. So let's continue on and see if we can find anything farther south toward Carson City on the Virginia and Truckee Railroad rail grade. Hi everybody, Jake, and we have found an awesome place on the old Virginia and Truckee Railroad rail grade. Two things. First, behind me, this is the south end of the Steamboat Creek Canyon. You can see the cut that the railroad had to go through as it headed north toward Reno. We're about 15 miles south of Reno, probably about halfway to Carson City. So you have to see how the railroad went through this cut, what an engineering feat that it was. The second item that we found here in the Steamboat Creek Canyon is the old bridge abutment of the Virginia and Truckee Railroad that actually crossed the creek before it headed out across Washoe Valley. This is awesome. You can see the abutments on both sides, the north and south side, where the bridge structure actually resided. So let's carry on out into Washoe Valley and see what we can find out there as we head toward Carson City. Hi everybody, Jake. And we have found something awesome on the old VNT right-of-way. We are out in the middle of Washoe Valley, Washoe Lake, Little Washoe Lake. And what you see behind me, or to my left, your right, this is an old trestle over what was called Winters Creek. The small abutments are still there. You can see the base. So we didn't think we would find anything out here, but we walked about, half mile to a mile out from the nearest little dirt road, and lo and behold, here's one of the old trestles from the VNT Railroad. So we're going to continue on, see if we can find any more of these on our way to Carson City. Hi everybody, Jake. Jake is at the bottom of the Lakeview grade. You can see behind me the VNT grade as it headed up to Lakeview Summit, where we just had the picture of where the station location was. It's about 2.5%. That's pretty steep for trains. This was to get over the foothills of the Carson Range from Reno down to Carson City. So we're only about 3 or 4 miles from Carson City. We're going to hike up here and see if there's anything more interesting. But Hi everybody, it's Jake from Everything is Jake 57, and we have now come back to the Carson City Depot, which concluded the portion of the Virginia and Truckee Railroad from Reno down to Carson City, which, as we talked about earlier, was the way to get to civilization, was getting this Virginia and Truckee Railroad back to Reno, and then you could get on the Central Pacific, primarily to San Francisco. So there was one more leg that we want to look at, and that is the leg from Carson City here down to a town called Minden, which was built in 1906. What had happened was the mines of Virginia City, the prize of the mines, had greatly diminished by the 1900s. The Bonanza Kings and all the rich people had returned to San Francisco, so therefore the V&T, which now was called the V&T Railway, was looking for another prize, which they found south of here in Carson Valley for agricultural and cattle raising areas. So the portion between Virginia City and Carson City lasted till 1938 when it was discontinued, and then the portion between Reno down to Carson Valley lasted till 1950 when it was discontinued. There has been a successful reattempt to rebuild some of the V&T between east side of Carson and Virginia City. I encourage you, if you'd like to ride the old railroad, to do that. But we're going to check out what we can find of the V&T Railway section south to Minden. Everybody, Jake. We have now, as you see behind me, we're about 5 miles south of Carson City, and we can see now the rail bed of the Minden branch of the Virginia and Truckee Railroad. This was built between 1904 and 1906, about 15 miles from Carson City, the depot there that we've seen in earlier videos, all the way down to Minden. We're going to check out and see what we can find. So we're going to hike down here. I'm really hoping we see maybe some of the bridges that were over the Carson River, and then we'll work our way down to Minden.
Hi, everybody. Jake. I was unable to get any farther south due to swampland and private property, but I was only about a half mile from the Clear Creek crossing of the Virginia and Truckee on its way to Minden, about halfway south from Carson City. As you can see here from this aerial photo, you could actually see the Clear Creek structure where it was. You can see the line of piers on the south side and the rail bed on the north side. So this is real cool here that the piers still exist. It is on private property, so please respect that. Let me go down and see if we can find the photo of the Carson River crossing on the Virginia and Truckee Railroad. About a half mile south of the Clear Creek River crossing, you can see also what was the Carson River crossing, a line of piers on the south side, and even a couple piers that remain on the north side. Obviously, the river has changed its course a little bit over time, but this is a really cool photo and look at where the Virginia and Truckee crossed the two main waterways south of Carson toward Minden. So let's continue on down, see if we can find any more right-of-way and any more items from the Virginia and Truckee as we head toward Minden.
Hey everybody, Jake. We are now south of the Carson River. And if you look that way, you're looking south toward Minden. You can see the entire right-of-way of where the VNT came south from Carson City. So let's see if there's anything interesting before we get down to the depot site in Minden and conclude this episode of Everything is Jake 57. Hey everybody, it's Jake, and we have finally reached Minden, Nevada, and I'm standing at the site of the Minden Depot. This was the southern terminus of the Virginia and Truckee Railroad. It was first service in 1906, and the last service is in 1950. It's pretty important down here in that the branch from Carson City to Minden became active because a lot of the agricultural, a lot of cattle, a lot of sheep, a lot of traffic that was non-mining related, and the section between Virginia City and Carson City had pretty much gone into not much activity. So this was really holding up the railroad for quite a while. However, by the late 1920s, two things led to the demise of the entire route between Reno and Minden. The first being the Great Depression in 1929, and then the onset of the trucking business started to overtake the profitability of the railroad. So Highway 395, which is right behind me, took over the trucking business and slowly and surely killed the Virginia and Truckee rail service. So behind me there, you can see the tracks heading off to the north where they would have gone as they headed back toward Carson City. So nothing left here other than the site. Have some great old photos to compare it to. But this concludes this episode of Everything is Jake 57. We hope you enjoyed the video. Make sure you hit that subscribe button. It doesn't cost anything to subscribe. And we will start cranking up the videos once again. Remember, everything is Jake.